for Pollinators, presented by our friends with the South Central Indiana Master Gardener Association. We appreciate all the programs that you sponsor throughout the year with us. And I want to remind everybody, if you're not a master gardener, that there is a plant sale on the plaza starting this Saturday at 9 a.m. So you might want to come out and support the master gardeners by buying some plants. And I think that's it. And now over to you, Rocky.
Thank you, Mary Claire. We want to thank you and your team there at the library for putting these programs on for the benefit of the viewers. And we treasure the partnership that we have with you. Briefly, before I introduce tonight's speaker, I need just to let the SCIMGA members that are watching to know that tonight's meeting will begin at 7:10. So we're going to have about a few minute break from after Kirsten's presentation, and then we'll start our meeting at 7:10. Okay, so I am very happy to introduce tonight's speaker to you, Kirsten Carlson. I love her email address. It's Miss Biology. And Kirsten is an adjunct instructor with Ivy Tech Community College, and she's also a visiting lecturer at Hanover College. Kirsten is a biological sciences instructor, and in particular, ecology. She will tonight share with us her experiences working through pollinators and their varying habitat needs. And tonight's program will be based on what we can do in our backyards to improve the environment, or the habitat, if you will, for pollinators. I first heard Kirsten speak last summer at the 4-H Fairgrounds, and she did a presentation on being able to improve our backyards to draw in songbirds. And tonight she's going to focus on those efforts that we can do to improve our backyards for pollinators. So Kirsten, thank you so much for doing this tonight, and we look forward to hearing you. And I just ask everyone, join me in welcoming Kirsten Carlson. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I hope everybody can see that just fine. So I put backyard in quotes because it could be your side yard, it could be your front yard that you want to improve. But before we move on, I do want to ask you a question. And the question is, what story do you want your backyard to tell? And think about that. What story do you want your backyard to tell? And it might be good to write it down eventually so you have a goal or a focus in mind to keep track of what your intentions are. So like Rocky said, I love ecology. And if you're not familiar with what ecology is, that's the whole point of trying to modify your backyard. Ecology is the science or the study of organisms' interactions, so how they affect the behaviors of each other, and also with the non-living part of the environment, so moisture, temperature, shade, sunlight, things like that. And that's what we want to take into consideration when we modify or even create habitats, especially for a particular set of organisms, such as pollinators. So if you think about the levels of ecology and your yard, you can study a specific organism, say the monarch butterfly, or you can study the entire population that might visit your yard. And then when you have different populations of butterflies and flowers and trees and whatnot going on, that's your community and that's in your yard. You see those critters coming to your yard, they are yours for the taking care of. And then when you step back and look at your entire yard, and I know this picture I have here is a really big yard, but you want to step back and say, what was my goal? What story do I want my yard to tell? So you can focus each of your efforts in improving your backyard at each of these different levels. You can choose to improve for one species, multiple species, or both plants and animals, and also for recreation use. So it's your choice, but it's your backyard, and you will find all of these things at these different levels in your backyard. So understanding habitat needs is where we want to begin. So what is a habitat? And that is any place that you find a critter living. It could be plant, animal, moss, which is a plant, fungus, whatever. And each one of those individual species has particular habitat needs. So those are the requirements that you want to hit in your yard, your habitats that you're amending or creating. So when we think about any type of critter, your habitat needs are food, water, shelter, space, and mates. And for pollinators, your food comes in a variety of form. Could be for forage, so it could be leaves for like leafcutter bees that you might be attracting. It could be nectar for those who are nectaring, such as butterfly, moths, bees, hummingbirds. Or it could be particular host plants that are chewing on your leaves as part of their early life stage in their life cycle before they become a moth, a butterfly, or whatnot. There are other pollinators besides those two, like beetles and flies. But you want to look at, what do I want to attract? What do I need? What do they need? Food, as far as food, shelter, water, space, and mate. So we're going to look at all these kinds of different habitat needs. When we look at habitat needs, the biggest reason for most pollinators, and actually most species who are declining, is due to habitat fragmentation. And when we fragment habitats, and I'll show you some pictures here of what I mean, into smaller islands, put roads through them, have lawns, shopping malls, whatever. When we fragment, we probably don't fragment so that every new habitat island has all of their habitat needs met. And that is where the issue is. If we don't have a habitat need met, at least one of them not being met, then probably you're not going to be able to sustain a population. And so when we look at these pollinators, you want to try to get as many of those habitat needs as met as possible. So here's a habitat, a subdivision. Look at all of those pollinator gardens. This is habitat fragmentation. Probably by the looks of this picture, with all the mature trees, this probably was a forest. And you probably had an interior to the forest with certain bird species, which are no longer there because there's no more interior, because there's houses there, who put lawns in, which is a monoculture. And there's probably a really good crop of Japanese beetles here as well. They love lawn. But again, look at what's missing and what you don't see. And then you ask the question, well, why don't I see those? In rural areas, this is often what you look at from a fragmentation standpoint. You see a lot of different fields surrounded by rows of trees, which actually make great habitat for mice and some edge species, songbirds. And then you'll get a really big boom in your hawk population. So that's one of the benefits for fragmentation, but unfortunately it hasn't benefited everyone equally. We're going to put our knowledge into practice. And if there's any questions right now, I can take a few questions. If there's anything that I have touched upon that we are having questions about.
At the
that
moment,
I can answer.
At the moment, no questions have come through.
Okay, that's fine. So now, These are pictures of what has happened in my yard in the past couple of days. I've seen spider webs, I've seen different pollinators on different flowers. I've seen mice, which depend upon pollinators for seeds. I have found a couple of different robins' nests, which they depend upon pollinators to feed their young. And then I did find a ootheca, an egg case. It's an old one, but it is of a praying mantis, a European praying mantis. So it's a non-native. But that does tell you that I have predators, I have prey, and I've got the system working. I've got people eating, or not people, but things eating other things. And I'm trying to provide enough flowers at each time of the season to be able to benefit as many pollinators as I can. But this is just a small picture of what's going on in my yard this week. So when we look at pollination, it's kind of nice to know what the big deal is. 80% of our pollination occurs via organisms, so some sort of animal. And that means about 75% of our food crops are animal pollinated. So that means, some of it's cereal crops, which is wind pollinated. But 1 in every 3 bites of your food, you can thank an animal for contributing for that. So successful pollination for your yield depends upon the fertilization, the successful pollination fertilization done by mainly an animal. Oftentimes, if you want to see how much pollination has occurred in fertilization, is cut an apple crosswise, and you'll find 5 openings in there. Each opening should have had 2 eggs, ovules in it. And if you don't find 10 seeds, that means either not successful fertilization or unsuccessful pollination via an animal, with everything else being equal, that it wasn't a weather event. One of the best things that you can do if you're not familiar with what do I put in for a pollinator, what do I need to put in as far as flowers, because that's what pollinators mainly need for the adult stage, and then leaves of the same plant for the younger stages, is called the Pollinator Syndrome. This is science, backed by science. People sit around looking at flowers, taking notes as to who visits them, what are they getting from it, what are the characteristics of the flower, and then they came up with this data table that you can use to determine what types of flowers you want to get for who you want to attract in your yard. And that way you can help have multiple flowers blooming of different species at your same time. Please note, in Indiana and the East Coast, typically our bats are all carnivores. So until you move to Arizona, New Mexico, the Southwest desert, disregard the bat for the pollinator part for us. There are there's a lot of characteristics of the trait. Look at your color of your flower. If you have yellow flowers, who's that going to attract? Well, that's going to be for the bees. Butterflies will probably still go for them too. If you had white flowers, who is that going to go for? So nectar guides, I want to show you what nectar guides are. These are like runways on your plant petals for the pollinator to know where to go. Some of your flowers you have scent to, because especially for your moths, they're flying at night, and they need to have their scent trail to find the flower that they're needing for food. Nectar, not all pollinators need nectar, but those who have varying amounts that they need, and not all flowers produce the same nectar in the same concentration with the same nutrients. So that's another reason why you want to have a variety of species. Pollen, not every pollinator needs the pollen. They carry the pollen, but they don't eat it. So butterflies, moths who have sipping mouth parts, they do not have chewing, so they do not take up pollen. And then the flower shape, structure and function. Think about the size of the flower, the size of the pollinator. Can they land on it, or do they have to hover? Can they walk, or do they have to tunnel in to find the nectar? Which do they prefer? So I'm going to focus on two of these traits, the nectar guides and the fact that bees can see UV wavelengths. And notice that they do not have red and green up here because they're red-green colorblind. They see red and green the same. So they wouldn't be able to distinguish a red petal from a green leaf. So using ultraviolet shading, this is a daisy on the left and the same daisy under UV. So you can see where the pollen fluoresces, and that helps to guide the bee in, and it's an efficiency thing. So you're not walking around some big box store trying to find what you thought was where it was, but they moved it, and you waste your time and energy. We don't want to waste the pollinators' time or energy because that reduces their ability to reproduce or keep the rest of their if it's a social bee, their colony alive. Here's Tithonia, your Mexican sunflower, which is a butterfly magnet and a finch magnet in the fall. And there it is on the right under UV light with the fluorescing pollen. Here's your Plains coreopsis, which is a springtime, early summer, springtime flower. And notice the pollen kind of gets scattered around on the picture on the left, but that's what it looks like to a bee. It looks like Vegas at night. Nectar guides, these are the runways. These are specific colors, specific lines on flowers that say, come this way, this is where our nectar and our pollen are. And if you have irises at home right now and they're blooming, go open those flowers up. Those are the neatest nectar guides. They're fuzzy to get into where the pollen and the nectar are. So on the left, you use color to find the lip and find the entrance into where the nectar and pollen are. With the foxglove, you have the little dots running in. And then with the pansy, you can see those lines, and you can see a little fuzziness and the yellow there, which bees really like. So those are nectar guides. Pollen, if you've never thought about looking up what pollen looks like under the microscope, is pretty cool. This is a falsely colored scanning microscope. So it's the surface. The stigma of flowers is quite sticky. And if you've never wondered why, and if you've had allergies and your nose starts running because pollen sticks there, then you now know why the stigma is sticky. So plants will get all sorts of different pollen sticking to their stigma, but they know their species from other species, and they know self from non-self. So some plants are what we call obligate cross-pollinators. They will not allow that pollen grain either to germinate, to go to the ovule, or it will not produce a seed. If they have to have cross-pollination, they won't self-pollinate. So there's a lot of science into how do I know to germinate, not to germinate for that pollen tube? How do I know to not accept it? So just know that there's lots of pollen from flying around the air. Your stigma is sticky to attract that, and you're only going to get your certain species to actually fertilize that ovule down in the ovary there to make your seed. So what kind of characteristics make a good pollen hitchhiker? So what are the things that, if you're launching flowers and you don't, and that's your goal for your garden, then you're going to need pollinators. What characteristics make a good pollinator to travel to your yard, get attracted, and then be able to carry pollen from one plant to another? And bees are quite somewhat efficient. They're fuzzy body. They use a limited number of species. So that means you have a high success rate of what we call floral constancy. The bees will be going from one flower to the other flower of the same species, but it may be a different plant. So they are constant in the type of flower. And when they've got that filled, they'll go back and then they'll come back and they can do another flower species. Milkweed has pollinia, sacs of pollen, so the bees have to carry that. They have to be able to land on your flower and get the pollen. So if you have some of those hostas, you have little robber bees. They go down to the base on the outside because they can't fit in the inside, and they chew a hole and then they get in and get the goods that way. So that's kind of fun. With tomato plants, you have bumblebees that beat their wings at an A440, which is enough frequency to get that pollen that's deep within the flower to vibrate and fall out and then fall on them. And so that's how your tomatoes get pollinated. So you want to use those characteristics to figure out what you want to plant, what you want to attract, and if you're wanting to get seeds so you can spread the wealth. Okay, any questions that I can take now before we get into specific habitat needs for specific pollinators?
No questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. So let's look at some bees and the habitat needs. So mostly all pollinators at some point in their lifespan, life cycle, need access to water. Bees like their water a little algae. On the algae side, it doesn't have to be fresh. They like it a little dirty. When you add water or make sure you have water features, you don't want these deep baths because they don't swim. Some people put bird baths out above the ground or on the ground and put rocks in them to allow them to stand on something and get the water. Bees use water to make their nectar, to seal mud, to keep their hives cooler if they're social bees. Wasps also need water as well. So they have to have access to food, and that depends upon what type of bee you're trying to attract or what you may already know that you have. But they do require a variety of nectar and pollen, and that's for nutrition. And it's got to be throughout their active season, not yours. So March through November, have some stuff blooming of some sort. Some people put out a little bit of honey water near some flowers to give them a little extra boost. And again, there's their preferred colors. And they like flowers that they can land on and walk around versus hover all the time. And then leaf cutter bees need leaves. So if you have some red bud trees and you find holes in your trees, that's the bees. Could be other things too, but bees will be putting nice little round holes in your leaves. So you want holes, you want your leaves to be eaten. And that's a little bit of a shift in thinking. When you want the perfect garden, it's going to come with holes because that means it's supporting wildlife. Shelter for bees is varied. Many bees are soil dwellers where they put their eggs. And so if you cover the bare soil up with landscape fabric or rocks or mulch, they have a hard time digging down to find the soil. Clump grasses are much better in your gardens than sod grass because clumps leave space between the grass plants where they can find shelter and find an area to dig a hole or and lay their eggs. Hollow stems of various diameters. So if you have plants that when you cut the stems and they're hollow, you can tie those up, you can leave them in the ground, you can keep them standing a little bit. They prefer one end open and one end closed. That way it's a little less work for them to try to close that end. Logs. I love putting logs in my gardens because it attracts all sorts of different wildlife, but it also allows those wood-boring bees to get in there and find some habitat as well. And then hollow trees. We have trees that we leave at what we call a safe height, that they allow hollows for bees. And we get natural bees having colonies in our dead trees. So we don't cut them all the way down to the ground. We cut them to what they call a safe height, so that if they were to fall down, nobody's going to get hurt. One of the bees that we can get around here and their population is declining is the mason bee cycle. So if you are interested in really trying to plant for the bees, I would look for your area and find out some specific bees and what you can do. But mason bees do have their life cycle in the ground, so they need that bare ground, and you would also have to be careful when you garden for your vegetables if you like to till, because your tiller will go down and disrupt those nests when you decide to till. So you might have to decide how you want to manage. But there's a nice life cycle stage and management period here for mason bees. So you can put mason bee hives out if you want, where they have the little openings that you can drill, or you can put not mulch in certain areas that you want to attract those bees to. You can decide your comfort level and what you want to attract, because your garden will tell your story and nobody else's story. Everyone's will be unique. One thing you probably already know is the host plant and nectar plants, since you're master gardeners. But I wanted to look at it as from a different perspective. So host plants are the plants that the eggs are laid on, and the caterpillars that come out for pollinators have chewing mouth parts. So they're going to eat those host plants. They're going to eat those plants. Nectar plants are for the adults because they have sipping mouth parts. And so we have a division. They're not competing for the same resources like human kids do with the adults after you're done. When you get onto solid food, then you're competing for the same food. Here, the same species are not competing for the same food sources for different stages. So that's really a neat way that they can divide competition out. So you need to consider host plants and nectar plants for the butterflies and moths, the lepidopterans. So just to look at a few here. So it tells you what the host plant is, and then the caterpillar that you'll find on it as far as the host, or for as the little critter eating your plant, and then eventually the butterfly or the moth. There, I do have in the notes part for this, there is a website, a worldwide database through the UK that has all of the world's plants and for host plants and what they pollinate, or what they feed, who the pollinator is that they're hosting. And so you can go in, you have to put the scientific name in it. So you can get close, you can just get the genus name or the family name, and it will give you all the different species of plants and all the different critters that lay their eggs on it. And so I put that in the notes on this page, and it's also is as a reference for you to look at. I would encourage you to look at that, and that will help you decide, hey, so-and-so has this in their yard, but I never see it. Well, I wonder why. So you can go and plug that name in and find out what host plants you need. So nectar plants. Flowers are pretty cool. They make nectar in the glands called nectaries. And it is the main primary food source for most adult moths and obviously most adult butterflies, or all adult butterflies. And so that's the major attractant that flowers have, because they can't pick up the roots to go and reproduce with another flower to make seeds and fruit. So nectar typically has a variety of different sugars in varying proportions. And so different flowers will have different sugars in different proportions. They also have amino acids. Those are the building blocks to make your protein. And your feathers are protein. Your beak is protein. Lots of protein. Your muscles are protein. Nectar also can contain what we call secondary compounds. These are not primary compounds, are not used in the normal day-to-day activities to keep the plant alive. It's extra. And so these can provide some benefit to the pollinator as well to us. Some of the plants like Echinacea we will use for our benefit as well. The volume of nectar and its concentration. So you can get nectar at like an 8% concentration to, you can get to the blizzard concentration where you could turn the flower upside down and the nectar doesn't fall out. And so proboscis have different butterflies and moths can handle those different concentrations. So some proboscis have the little skinny coffee straw, so they need the thinner, and then some can have a thicker, so they can have those blizzard nectar flowering plants. So another reason why you want to have a variety of flowers of different species in your garden and in your yard. And then and you probably know this, but you may not know why. Choose native plants as much as you can over cultivars. And I'm not a purist on this. Just be very choosy about your cultivars. Because if you put a plant in there and nobody's visiting it, nobody's eating the leaves, it's totally being ignored, or you say, hey, it's deer, it's not edible for deer or bee or, flies or whatnot. If nobody's going to eat it, then it's not providing a habitat need, except taking up energy out of the soil that some other plants could use. So let me show you some nectar plants. I'm going to show you another picture of it, native versus a non-native. So if you just want to match up nectar and host plants, and you want to start out simple, get some asters, some goldenrods. Not all goldenrods are as aggressive as Canadian. Zinnias, and the non-doubles are the better. Veneries are really good for them. Ageratum, Mexican sunflower, again, that's awesome, especially in the fall. Verbena, and my tall verbena comes back every year. Calamint, and any of those mints. And then Joe Pieweed is also a very good one, along with some others that are a lot out there. But what else you can put in? Put fennel in your garden. Don't just keep it into your veggies. It loves, or swallowtail love it, and it is quite pleasant. And the bronze fennel is a perennial around here. Pipevine, the passiflora plants for fritillaries, malva, lots of different willows will attract the viceroy, and asters for crescents. And yes, that plantain that gets in your yard, that's needed for the buckeye caterpillars. So butterfly habitat needs. Again, they have host and nectar plants. When you put these host and nectar plants close together, that reduces the energy between the female having to fly between a host and a nectar plant to get enough energy to lay her eggs. So that helps the number of eggs that can be laid. So that increases the chance of pollinators in populations increasing. Those that are migratory, like the monarch, the populations in August, September, they have to have a lot of nectar resources in that fall. And because they are one of the few butterflies that can actually gain weight, their goal is to get fat because they have to fly to Mexico, which takes energy, and they have to live off that stored fat all winter. And so their goal is to get fat. And if we don't have enough nectar sources for them and to get started, and one of the best ways is getting them started is providing them with good quality host plant food so those caterpillars are fat, because that will transfer to a fat butterfly. Access to shelter for our pollinators is a must, and you don't have to put butterfly houses in. They don't always work. You just plant your plants closer together so they can hang out of the rain or not get so wet. And then caterpillars, you often will see a caterpillar one day and then you never see it again. That's because it went on a walkabout. They often do not make their chrysalis on the same plant that the host is. They'll go and take a walk. Monarchs, they want something that's sturdy and horizontal to hang that chrysalis at a vertical. Swallowtails are not as picky. They can do it at an angle because their pupa is attached by 2 strands, and they have it as an angle. Monarchs have to have it hanging straight down without anything touching its sides, or else it can damage the wings and they won't fly again. One critter that is often overlooked in our garden are moths, and they're the ones that keep pollination going 24/7. Some flowers are particular for moths because they open at night, but they can also pollinate flowers that are open during the day as well, as long as they are highly scented and they meet their specific needs. So you want to plant specific host and nectar plants to support those moths that you want to attract. Not all moths have feeding mouth parts as adults, like your Luna moth and others. So you don't have to worry about feeding them. You have to worry about making sure you have host plants for those critters. So again, you want to plant a lot of these plants of the same species in the same area as a billboard perfume factory for them. And when you do, if you ever have milkweed and a huge patch of it, go out at night when it's all in bloom and it's a party happening there after dark. You can also add rotten fruit feeders around those areas to help feed them, to provide them some nectar, but it's not going to be for the host plant. It's not going to have eggs laying, but it would provide some nectar for those moths that maybe you don't have the host plants for yet, or the pollinator plants or the nectar plants for yet, but you're working on it. And there are diurnal, there are daytime, and there are nighttime moths, and they do feed off the same plants. So a good host plant for a moth is going to have leaves that are silver, gray, blue-green, or variegated, something that can reflect that moonlight. And those flowers are going to be light in color, light yellow, light pink, light white or off-white, and they're going to look like satellite dishes. They're going to be huge petals, very scentsy, lots of pollen, and oftentimes they're only flowering once per day. So I can take any questions right now.
Okay.
Anybody have?
Yep, we have a few questions.
Okay.
The first one has a word in it that I'm probably going to mispronounce, but it says, by clump grasses, would that include fescues, Fescues?
So fescue.
There you go.
The non-native fescues you don't want to plant. Fescues often will form massive amounts. A clump grass would be like little blue stem, a lot of your sedges, broom sedge, some of your ornamentals are kind of like that, but you have to be careful because some of them kind of escape. Your sod grasses are what you don't want. You don't want a grass that, if you know the behavior of it, it forms that solid lawn. But fescues often will escape a clumpy behavior and form a massive sod that inhibits things from getting through it, and then and even some germinating. Sweetgrass is a good grass. It does form light lawns or airy lawns where there's space in between them. Any other questions?
Yes.
Okay.
The next question. Concerning bees' bare soil needs, perhaps we simply leave bare unplanted areas in our backyards?
Yes, you can do that. And they can find between your plants too. Yes. They don't like soggy soil. So don't leave a bare around your rain garden. They like it where it's going to warm them. So on the south facing side, they like morning sun, and they like it kind of on a slope where water could drain down. And if you provide artificial openings for bees, like if you were to drill holes in a piece of wood, you want to angle that up so the water would run down, not even and not down. So water gets in and then they can drown the little babes. You want them angle up so they run out.
Okay, and then the last question we have right now is there anything gardeners can do to ensure or improve the amount of nectar plants produce?
That is partly genetics with the plant. One thing that you could do is to try to maintain as healthy of a plant as possible. So make sure you plant the plant in the appropriate conditions for the plant's habitat, and not try to make an artificial where it makes a lot of work for you. So not trying to take water plants or plants that like soggy roots or wet roots and put them in, make a basin out of your garden that, will retain some water, and then it does dry out, and then those plants do not have as good a water quality as to fulfill all of the plant's basic metabolic needs, because pollen and nectar are very energy needy products of plants, requires a lot of resources. They're going to be the first ones to go when the plant is not getting enough needs met for itself, if that makes sense. So making sure you plant in the plant in the right conditions to begin with, and then they're naturally adapted to those, and not trying to make them fit where you want them and not where they should go.
Okay, that's all the questions for the moment.
Okay, so once you get this going, and you may have already figured this out, you're going to attract a lot of other critters. And one of those titles is called beneficial organisms. These are part of the food chain. There's nothing you can really do about it. You want it because it's nature's way of balancing everything. Even you want predators that will prey on the predators that prey on the bugs that you're trying to attract. These are natural pests. The lacewing eggs, they don't dangle to the right like the picture does. They dangle underneath. They're pretty neat to look at. Lady beetle larvae, they eat aphids, which compete for resources. The same with caterpillars. Praying mantids, we have two invasive ones, the European and the Chinese. Those Chinese ones make those really big oothekas. You can, when you find those, you can dispose of them if you want. You can let them go. The hummingbirds often fall prey to some of them. They will learn to stalk the feeder, the hummingbird feeder. So there's lots of beneficials out there. And if you upset one balance, you're going to upset the entire balance. So this is one thing that you will have to just learn to live with. One thing, adult wasps are nectar feeders. They get those skinny waistlines. They go predate to feed their larvae, which are meat eaters. So wasps are actually beneficial for nectaring, but also they are really good to have in your garden, especially for your tomato hornworms if you get those. Because they'll be glad to lay their eggs on them, but you've got to attract that wasp with flowers. And one of the best flowers that wasps love is the basil flower. So plant basil, allow some of it to flower, and you'll get those wasps in. And then when they hear the scream of the tomato plant, because I'm getting eaten, then they'll be glad to go over to the tomato plant and surveil and figure out, hey, there's that hornworm, and I have some babies to unload or some eggs to unload. So you've just done the wasp a favor by doing that companion planting. So you have predators, you'll have those parasitoids as well. So these both are predators. It's a ladybug larvae eating an aphid, and then you've got your non-native praying mantid there. And these are lacewing larvae hanging upside down. They are really cool to have. And then those are ladybug eggs underneath there. So parasitoids, these are the ones that lay their eggs, and they are meant to kill the host of their larvae. So these are your natural little killers for some of your larvae. So you want to try to have a lot of different varieties of plants and host plants to spread the wealth. So at least some of your pollinators will make it. I've read where only 1% of monarchs make it from egg to adulthood. So choosing your plants, you need to have your zone. You want to be careful, especially with sunflowers. When you look at those labels, some of them are pollen-less. So you will attract them, but you've just wasted the bee's time and anyone else who needs that pollen. Check for pesticide-free plants. They're out there, and there's also pesticide plants out there. Maintenance, watch your cleanup. You don't want a tidy garden because some of these need those stems. Some of them do their pupation on stems. Some pupate, like a lot of moths will pupate in the ground. So if you rake up those leaves, you may have just raked up their cocoons as well. Look at your water, soil, light requirements, your kind of plant. Again, plant as many diverse types of plants that you can have. And then look at your plant habitat. And I'm sure you've heard of trailing, they're spread, self-seeding, but some plants are edge species. Coneflower particularly likes to be planted around the edge. It doesn't like to be planted in the center where everybody's touching it on all sides. It doesn't like that, and it will actually die out. Plant for the billboard effect, similar species, 3 to 5, and that way it reduces energy loss among those species that are flying between your plants. That landscape fabric, again, it's not nice. And also it inhibits your native seed bank, which also can include weeds, which is your own definition. And then aerial soaking, that can inhibit it can dilute nectar. So you want to try to get the ground watered and not so much a sprinkler. This is what I wanted to show you about native. So here's purple coneflower. There's a native one in the far left. Bees love it, finches love it, butterflies love it. And here are some nativars and cultivars. So a nativar is closely related to the genetics, but we've changed it a little bit, kind of like the bottom right here, where we've made it where we can get more flower stems. It's going to be shorter than the normal. It will have pretty much almost the same nutrition. We've changed the color here. And so you can see if they work in your garden, this freak of nature here is not a freak of nature, it's a freak of human nature. When you ask a flower to go from this one row of petals to this, you have to think about a pie. You only have 100% efficiency. And if you're asking me to make more rows of petals, some energy is going to have to be transferred from one place to another to do that. And I can guarantee you it's going to be taken from the pollen and the nectar, the reproductive organs, because those are high energy organs to put your plant products into. So these, one that they probably can't even find where the nectar and pollen are, and then it may not even make it. So you have completely wasted their time. And I'm sure some of you have felt that way and don't like that. Native plants, another reason to go native. Here's your grass. Native plants have varying lengths of roots. They're not competing for all of the same resources that our little plants that we buy, our garden bed plants. These guys are going down deep. They're going to withstand drought. This is also one reason why it's also very hard to dig up a native plant and it survive transplant. Their leaves roots are very, very deep. Do not forget your trees and shrubs. And Rocky will be upset if I don't mention this. Notice the tree oak. It supports 519 species of Lepidoptera. That is moths and butterfly larvae. And so just to bring this home, if you had a pair of chickadees in your Carolina chickadees in your yard, and they were a mating pair and they made a nest and they had a brood, that brood requires 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars for the 16 days it takes to get them from the egg to fledge. And then they feed them for another week or two afterwards as a fledgling. And it's not going to happen just on your flowers in your garden. If you're wanting to plant for pollinators, you also need to think about the baby pollinators. So when you plant trees, plant the most bang for your buck. So willows, and those willows are bushes as well. And there's blueberries, or bushes are on the right here. And these are the number of different hosts that they will party with. So you want to not just fixate on flowers as a herbaceous, but flowers that are in bush form or flowering trees, or even wind pollinated trees like oak, because they want them for their leaves. So that is a must. Companion planting, think about your yard, your garden. Add flowers to your garden to help with the beneficials to manage the garden pests. See cabbage here? Those cabbage whites love that. That's actually bird food, because your cabbage white larvae are going to go on there. If you put a little bird nest in your yard or in your garden, or a post that they can stand on, they'll be glad to come down and get those larvae. I plant cabbage around all of our bird houses. It's fast food. It's my McDonald's for them. Get rid of your invasives, because they just are an energy user. Think about your habitat is in phases. I'm always working on stuff. It's always changing. And sharing and overtaking, crowding plants, dig them up and share them. Your habitat size is your goal. It's whatever your story is going to tell. And then you guys can collect seeds and share them among people. One thing I might encourage you to try, not with all of your milkweed, but clip some back, not to the ground, but to, you still want some nodes on there with your leaves. Then stop it about mid-July. Come August, September, those are going to be really nice, fresh leaves and provide a lot of really good nutrition when the regular non-mowed milkweed is starting to die because of its seeds. And you can try to put, some people put, rabbit guards around so they can't get in there. So you can think about, as it ages, your plants will get bigger. Are they going to overcrowd? Again, designed for efficiency, variety of plant choices. Look at your pollinator syndrome. And then add some other features, your garden stake, your trellising. These, I've been doing this a lot, putting these tripods up and putting some vining things and putting flowers underneath. And it's a nice little rest area. And it's neat because when fledgling birds, they can get up here and then you can watch the parents feed them. And I've even been able to see a hummingbird feed its baby as well that way. So there's your big picture. Your changes are not going to happen overnight. And if you can strategically put a pollinator garden near your vegetable garden, you're going to have higher yields because they're going to naturally go and pollinate your vegetables as well. Lots of lessons learned, and I know it's almost 7. So you could probably read through this. One thing I do want to tell you, having done research and practicing it in my own yard, I have patches or islands of milkweed around. And darn it, if the milkweed butterfly is not a patchy flyer, it likes to fly for a little bit, rest, fly for a little bit, rest. So I have all these little islands of little gardens all around, and they really do a good job of visiting those. And so it matches I plant plants that match the behavior of the critter. And monarchs are very picky that they only will lay typically 1 egg on a milkweed plant. That's their preference. So if you find a bunch of eggs on a milkweed, that means she's probably pretty desperate that there's not very many milkweed around. So be glad she's chosen yours. Doug Tallamy had a really good quote in a conference that I went to see. Wildlife is 98% place, 2% bone and flesh. So protecting its habitat is what it's all about. So think about your yard is 98% wildlife place, and the rest of it is just it's bone and flesh. So habitat is where it is. So here's where I'm ending. So our future flies with pollinators. Everything is a seed. Every thought, word, action, prayer, every seed we sow produces a harvest. So the kind of future that we have depends entirely on what seeds we sow right now, and the choice is ours. So here's all of my references. It takes a lot to do one of these types of programs, but there's a lot of them there for you. So questions that I can answer quickly.
Yes, we have a
Okay.
couple of questions. Last year I had thousands of aphids and the aphid eating bugs with red, black wings all over my butterfly weed. It was high maintenance. What can I do?
Well, butterfly weed is not native to our area. So if you don't want them, you could get rid of the butterfly. Wait, you said butterfly weed and not butterfly bush. Sorry. That is part of the milkweed community. Aphids are part of the progression of the transition of different critters using the milkweed plant as a host. You can squish them because you can't really add a pesticide because it's going to be a host plant for the monarchs, and that's probably why you're wanting it. You can hose them off The monarch eggs and caterpillars can withstand a hosing, and those aphids will fall off, and then it takes them all day to get back on. If you find ladybug eggs on it, and ladybug can eat 1,000 or so of those in its lifespan. So it's best to have ladybugs will eat them. The lacewing larvae will eat them. If you've got those crab spiders, you want to get those predators for them. And if you can do that plus squishing them, just make sure there's nobody underneath when you go and squish them that you really didn't want to squish. But a combined effort there is what you're going to get, but you can't avoid it. It's going to happen.
Okay. I foster monarchs and I thought the tachnid fly was a predator for them. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a parasitoid wasp or fly, so it lays its eggs on the larvae. And so there's the only thing that you can do is bring in the eggs to guarantee that you do not have been parasitized.
Don't the tomato worms change into a hummingbird or sphinx moth?
Yes, the moth. They do.
Okay, and then finally, I lost a lot of my monarch caterpillars last summer to toads. Any suggestion to distract them?
Well, the monarch, the caterpillars to toads. So what you could do, so I'm wondering how the toads are getting them.
Rocky, do you want to elaborate?
Are they crawling on the lower part of the leaves or the plant, I mean?
Kirsten, I'd go out and I would count a dozen or so still small young caterpillar on the leaves, and I'd see toads in the garden, and I'd go out the next morning and they'd be gone. They'd be wiped out. So I'm assuming the toads got them.
So the glycoside that is in the monarch caterpillar, which it gets from the leaf of the milkweed,
Right.
is toxic to vertebrates. So I can't imagine that frog would keep eating them when it makes it sick, unless it's a really, really not intelligent frog.
Okay.
But that's typically why there's very few bird species that can tolerate eating them, because they've adapted to withstand that toxin. But it's a vertebrate toxin. If we ate it, we would in a large quantity. So it would be adverse to us as well. I bet you it probably could be praying mantids. It could be other non-vertebrates. So invertebrates could be doing it as well. Spiders will get them. And they may have been parasitized and it showed up during that night where they died and then the ants carried them off.
Okay. All right. I blame the toads. So what you're saying makes sense. I guess I hadn't thought about the toxins that they would be toxic to the toads. Okay.
I can look that up just to make sure that some of ours aren't adapted to eating those, but I would assume because it's toxic to vertebrates.
Okay. Or I got dumb toads.
Yes, I was not trying to say that word, but there's, yeah.
All right. Well, that was our last question. Mary Claire, do
Okay.
you have anything you would like to close with?
I just want to thank everybody for participating tonight. And thanks once again to the Master Gardeners for organizing this. Thanks to Kirsten. And remember the plant sale on Saturday, coming up 9 o'clock till 12:30, something like that on the plaza. And there's also a yoga session on the plaza. And the library's Clio Seed Share will have a table at the plant sale also. You can learn
Yes.
about that when you're here. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Very good. I'm going to kick you all out. Have a good night.